Clerk will report a conference report.
Mr. Speaker, page 5 of the printed calendar, page 5, conference report has been received for House Bill 1811. House Bill 1811, Delegate Collins's bill. House Bill conference report for House Bill 1811 relating to holding handheld personal communication devices while driving a motor vehicle. The conference report has been distributed. It's available online, and it is now before the body.
Delegate from Frederick, Delegate Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the hands-free bill. Just so everyone understands, we have added in his hand as part of the language. We've already covered that. It's identical. While physically manipulating the device to view, read, or enter data, and has an enactment clause of April 1st of 2020, I would ask that we pass the conference report.
Delegate from Norfolk, Delegate Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking of the conference report.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, I have had a chance to review the language that has been inserted in by the conference report, and I have some concerns. I did vote for this bill as it came out of the House, and I want to emphasize to folks that what we are now voting on becomes way more subjective than I think is really what we want out on our roadways. I share the concerns of some of the other folks in this body about how this will impact driving while black and people of color in their motor vehicles, and so I would urge that we vote against this conference report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Shenandoah, Delegate Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, will the delegate from Frederick yield for a question?
The delegate yield for a question.
I yield.
Delegate yields.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize to the delegate. I just wanted to have him again articulate to the body, if he could, what the I know he knows the concerns that I had, and I'm just trying to make sure that I was right in my instinct that I might be more comfortable with voting for this now. So if he could just allay my concerns.
Mr. Speaker, I would tell my former mentor that yes, I have relayed some of his concerns with this, that this will, this has any manipulation of the device where you're viewing or reading or entering data on the phone. So this does allow for some use of the phone, but it does not allow for use of the phone to enter, read, or view data.
I thank the gentleman.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Simon.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of the conference report.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, it sounds to me like what we have is not a hands-free bill, but an anti-texting bill. I mean, it's a hands-free bill that's not. It doesn't say anything about dialing the phone to make a phone call. It doesn't say anything about using it and holding it up to your ear to talk, but only if you're trying to text or do Facebook or GPS or whatever else. So I don't think that it's a hands-free bill after all. I think it's sort of what we had before. I hope it would be the pleasure of the body to reject the conference report.
Delegate from Norfolk, Delegate Lindsay.
Will Delegate Collins resume the floor for a question?
The delegate yield for a question.
I yield.
Delegate yields.
You know, I'd ask the gentleman if I'm correct in my understanding that the language says to hold in his hand, and then in operative, the dispositive part says while physically manipulating the device to view, read, or enter data. So would that not include someone who has their phone as a GPS? Because that is viewing the stream. Am I not correct?
Mr. Speaker, I would answer the delegate's question by saying that he is correct, that if you're holding the phone in your hand while you're viewing GPS, that is behavior that is now illegal. However, if the phone is with the GPS on it, is sitting on the chair or in the cup or in your holder, then that would be considered legal. This is a hands-free bill to prevent people from being able to use or enter data on their phone, is how I would answer the delegate.
Follow-up question, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate yield for another question.
I yield.
Delegate yields.
My favorite saying from this legislative session is words have meaning. So I'd ask the gentleman, does he still have that same interpretation when the operative language reads to hold in his hand a handheld personal communication device while physically manipulating the device to view, read, or enter data? So am I correct that in that instance, even looking at the phone while holding it would be something to cause one to be stopped?
The delegate is correct.
Delegate from Spotsylvania, Delegate Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was wondering if the gentleman would resume the floor for a question.
Delegate, yield for a question.
I will yield.
I guess I'm a little confused by this now, and I just want to clarify. It appears to me, based on the statements I heard before and the questions that were asked, that you would still be allowed to receive and make phone calls on your phone while you're driving. You would not be able to text or look at Facebook or something like that. I mean, it appears to be just a slight expansion of our current texting ban. Would that be an accurate summary of the bill?
Mr. Speaker, I would respond by saying that this goes a little bit farther than our original texting while driving statute in that it does encompass everything that involves the electronic device, as well as prohibitive behavior of having the phone in one's hand. But receiving a phone call, it does not prevent someone from having the phone in their hand, for example, answering the phone. But if they were doing a FaceTime video while a phone call, then in fact that would be illegal because they'd be viewing data that was coming into or out of their phone.
All right. Thank you.
Delegate from Shenandoah, Delegate Gilbert.
Well, Mr. Speaker, speaking to the conference report,
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I was trying to just assess where we are, and I don't know that I lend anything to this discussion other than my years as a prosecutor and defense attorney trying to prove and stop matters of proof. And I think I understand what I think I understand about this conference report is that it does significantly more than what we currently have under current law, which I've always argued was completely useless. And I think law enforcement believes that, and I know that's the reason we keep coming back and doing this. And I heard the delegate from Fairfax over there in the corner that he's not happy that this is not the bill he would like it to be. And that is certainly a reason to vote against it. But I certainly think if he chooses to vote against it, he is also voting for something that is much better than current law and that would go a great deal further in protecting lives. I have voted against this generally. I voted initially to get it out of subcommittee, and then I voted against it ever since because all I wanted was some measure in the law that would allow, people, throughout the process we heard people talking about all the technology in their vehicles. And not all of us represent people who have all that technology in their vehicles. Some of us represent people who don't have means like that and don't have, iPhones. And they don't have Bluetooth in their cars. And all the explanations we heard from all the people in committee who have all that technology all related to those scenarios. And so all I wanted all along was some way for people of lesser means to be able to continue to use the phone in their car. I mean, you have people who their livelihood depends on being able to use the telephone. You have older people who do not have these types of smartphones that I think were contemplated by the original legislation. And this would allow people to continue to be able to use their telephone against their ear and on speakerphone and other things as long as they're not digitally manipulating data on their phone. And the real public health crisis, the epidemic that we have on our highways is people are addicted to looking at their telephone and they are riding down the road, and all of us who come back and forth to Richmond or spend any time on the highway see these people passing us at 80, 85 miles an hour, staring at their phone, typing on their phone, and driving. And you've seen this uptick in deaths over 40 years. Deaths went down on the highways, and then all of a sudden in the last 4 or 5 years they started ticking back up again. And it's because human beings are addicted to constantly checking, rechecking, and interacting with people on these devices. And I think I'm finally, and it may not matter to anybody else, but I had a problem with this all along. I think I'm finally in a position where I can say that even I am willing to say enough is enough, and I think this gets us much further down the road, no pun intended, than it did before. And I think it's good to, it's not perfect, but we've tried so hard to get the perfect bill out of here for year in, year out for the last several years. And I just think we have to do something more than what the law currently allows. And I would just encourage the members not to let as we've heard today already, let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I do think this goes a long way toward helping law enforcement. And I know that's a concern with some people, but people are dying. And we got to get the phones out of people's hands while they're driving. And I think this gives a prosecutable offense that we don't have right now under the current law. And we got to make a decision whether we want to protect people or not. And, you know, for the people who argue you should be able to do whatever you want in your car, then you don't care about DUI laws either. And I think this is every bit as dangerous, if not more, and more widespread and more pervasive than driving under the influence of alcohol. And people are getting killed. And I'm happy with this to the extent that it is a much better measure than it was before, and it's a much better measure than current law exists right now. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Loudoun, Delegate Bell.
Mr. Speaker, will Delegate Collins resume the floor for purpose of a question?
I will yield.
For a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hopefully it's a friendly question. I apologize to Patron for not getting this to him before. Under the new changes, would a smartwatch qualify as a handheld device if it's strapped to your wrist, such as my Apple Watch?
Mr. Speaker, I would answer the question that no. And that question's been raised before about under the hand-free statute, and in order to encompass everything electronic that one may have on their wrist or all the other, checking your Fitbit to make sure you got your circles for the day. The definitions within the code are it's a handheld personal communication device. Apple Watch, excuse me, is not considered a handheld personal communication device.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman.
Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the conference report.
Delegate has the floor.
I think it was even later at night than this when Crim Sub of, or I should say Sub 1 of the Courts Committee had exactly the same discussion back and forth for more than a half hour. And the language that you have before us is exactly what a 20-year on-the-road captain, patrolman said would not work. Because all you have to do, we all have speed dial on phones today. You just press the button and now you're talking. When the trooper tried to see what you were doing, you had something in your hand and you were doing something, but as soon as he signaled for you to come over, all you do is press the button and now you're talking on the phone. And that's legal under this bill. We went back and forth, and the only enforceable, cleanly enforceable, without subjective judgment is hands-free. You don't hold on to the phone, because anything else will be subjectively enforced, and it will also be distracting. If I personally can't accept that this comes even one step further than where we were about texting and driving. But it certainly doesn't even begin to come where we need to be on distracted driving. Even the gentleman from Shenandoah a few moments ago, as he was speaking about people's addiction to these instruments, even he said, and they want to talk on them. And this is equally distracting to anything else you have here as far as texting, as well as just being absolutely subjective in enforcement. We must do better than this.
Delegate from Powhatan, Delegate Ware.
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion.
Delegate has the floor.
I move the pending question.
Delegate Ware moves the pending question. As many in favor of that motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. That motion carries. Shall the conference report be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 45, noes 50.
Ayes 45, noes 50. The conference report is rejected.